Okay, so let's talk about working with really strange, unwieldy materials. In this case, it's going to be super large white blackout curtain, and let me draw you a quick diagram of what I'll be working with. So our blackout curtain material is essentially a large rectangle. We're going to call this side A and side B, where side A is the width and side B is the length. So I know that A is going to be my width of 54.5 inches, and my B is 107 inches. Now, it's important to know what our width and our length is before we start. It's going to allow you to have better cuts in the end. But how can we get such big, perfect cuts on such a large piece of material? You are going to use the power of the Pythagorean Theorem. And what that is it is an equation to solve for this diagonal line. Knowing the length of this line is actually going to help you have a perfect rectangle. How does that work? Well, let me explain. The Pythagorean theorem goes like this. You have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. What is c? This is c. That is the length of our hypotenuse. So we have variables that we know. So we know that our a is going to be 54.5. We're going to square that number. We're going to add that to our length, which is 107 inches. We're going to square that, and that is going to be the length of our hypotenuse. Now we're going to use this hypotenuse. By the way, in this rectangle you actually have two, and they should be identical in measure. So we're going to use the length here to start from a given point here in the corner, and we're going to measure from here all the way down to where this length hits the other side of the fabric. And that is going to mean that between here and here, if our hypotenuse is this number, then we know that our length here on side B is going to be our desired 107 inches. That's how we're going to use this, okay? So 54.5 squared gives me an enormous number. So I get 2970.25. I'm going to add that to 107 squared, which is 11,449. I know these are long numbers, but you know what? It's the power of mathematics, right? So we're going to add these two numbers together, giving us a grand total of 14,419.25 is equal to the length of our hypotenuse, which is c squared. And then we're going to take these numbers and we are going to square them on our calculator. And squaring that number gives me a length of 120.08, and that is going to be the length of the hypotenuse, okay? So let's see what that actually looks like when we implement our super awesome mathematical equation. All right, so what I've done is I've taken my piece of white blackout fabric and I've gone ahead and laid it out, okay? And I'll go ahead and point out here where in this equation we're at and how it's being implemented. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a spot to anchor all of my measurements. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this corner, and if you look at the video, there you can see I've gone ahead and I've placed a jar to mark my starting point. I have a fairly long piece of fabric to use, so I'm going to mark my starting point here, and that's where I'm going to start measuring right across to get the length, to get the width of my fabric, and then I'll measure from here down to get the length of my fabric. It's always a good idea to have a nice, clear workspace whenever you're working on these like jumbo, supersized pieces. If you've got cats and dogs, kick them out of the room for a minute just so that you can kind of cut this thing and get it out of the way. The other thing that's helpful whenever you're doing these large cuts of fabric is to grab a couple of clamps. I have a handful of these guys, and these are really great clamps to use because you can go ahead, they're springy and they're strong, so you can actually like grip your measuring tape right into the corner, into this corner here, or on the video, that little guy right there. You want to just clamp it down so that your tape measure doesn't move. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your tape measure that is now clamped, and you're going to go right across your material until you come to this number on the measuring tape. Make sure that your measuring tape is lying nice and flat while you take your measurements. A flat measuring tape means a more accurate measurement. So if you need to finesse it a little bit, feel free, but you want to make sure that everything is lying flat. Also, just make sure before you start cutting anything that your material is flat as well. Do a couple of checks. I think as I was like walking around the fabric, I kind of wriggled it a little bit. So I'm going to take an extra minute to just go ahead and like tug out the other corner just to make sure everything is perfectly flat. And there you go. So where my measuring tape is right here is the length that I've calculated here on our equation. And I'm pretty satisfied with this measurement. Everything is nice and flat. So I've gone ahead and taken a moment to just go ahead and make a little mark onto my blackout material so that I can refer back to that mark. And I'm gonna go ahead and also check the length between the mark that I've made here and the top with the length on this side as well. So if this is 120 inches, and I know that the width is 54.5 inches, when I lay down my measuring tape, the side B should be 107 inches, both here on this side and here on this side. If your measurements are incorrect, here is what will happen. If for some strange reason, it's actually mathematically impossible for you to get this 120-inch hypotenuse anywhere above or below, 107 inches in length. I'm sure you could, but you might want to double check and make sure everything's lying flat before you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally fine, and you're like, not fine. So easiest way to check it is to just swing your measuring tape down from the long side to the second longest side and make sure that the measurement from up here to down here is 107 inches. So in my video, you can see I'm taking the measuring tape here. Again, using my clips, I anchor it. And then I'm just gonna run my measuring tape right along the side there. You can see, boop, 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 laying down the measuring tape, and it's laid down, and it's accurate. I will go ahead and measure that other side, and where it is, I get 107 inches. So that is how you get a perfect rectangle, by using the power of the Pythagorean Theorem. It is a super easy equation that you come across way more often than you would ever think you would whenever you are sewing anything, especially curtains. So, welcome to Fashion Babe Live, where I give you impromptu math lessons. And all of the tools of science and math are the tools of fashion. Anyone who tells you anything different is probably not the brightest bulb. So, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that this video has helped you to cut your own oversized, large, rectangular objects.